Well, let me first thank everybody that participated in the presentations and the panel discussions yesterday afternoon and this morning. I personally feel like it's really been a terrific dialogue and a great chance for a lot of our staff to get to listen and participate in this too. And that, so what we've really debated over the last 2 days is energy policy, natural resources policy, and environmental protection. And when you put all those together, to me it's about making Kentucky a great place for people to want to live and to work. And the tip of the spear on that, as he says, is my boss, the governor, who's, as you can tell, this is not the Secretary's Conference on Energy and Environment, it's the Governor's Conference on Energy and the Environment. And it's not the norm that the governor attends with us, but we are fortunate this year that Governor Bevin has agreed to attend and give some encouraging words to you and take some questions too. So without any further introduction, because you all know him better than I do, I think, Governor Bevin. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all being here. I would be happy, I'll speak for a few minutes, but I really would be happy to take questions from you about anything. And while we don't have mics roaming around, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Be thinking in advance if there's certain things you'd want to ask of me that I may be able to shed some light on, and I'll call on you. And whatever your question is, I'll repeat it in case others at the other end of the room didn't hear it. But I appreciate you being here, and it is encouraging. I did just speak to the folks from the EPA that were on this last panel as they were heading out. I had occasion to meet them both at the Southern States Energy Board conference a couple of weeks ago. And good people, I'll tell you, they're dedicated, hardworking, committed to doing what's right. And that is really, at the end of the day, what we need. Your comments are kind, and it is interesting how many... I've come to realize, because I've gone to a fair number of governors this and governors that, and it's sad to me that it has not been the norm that governors come to the governors this and the governors that. But I figure that the least I should do is try from time to time, as best I can, to come to these so that you can hear from me my thoughts, but also that I can hear from you as well. And we have in Secretary Snavely somebody who gets this industry. When I was looking to put people in place, not only in this cabinet, but in all the other cabinets in the executive branch, I looked for 3 criteria. I looked for people who had good character. I looked for people that were competent. They knew what it was they were talking about and what they would be overseeing. And I looked for people that were committed to serving, and that was it. Really wasn't that complicated. It wasn't a strict litmus test of any particular thing, any particular ideology. Coming through that process of people with good character, people who are competent, and people who were committed to serving. Republicans came through that funnel. Democrats came through that funnel. And people who've really never been very actively engaged one way or the other and registered as independents came through that funnel. And that created a lot of concern. Some people were offended at the idea that I would put somebody of a different party into a cabinet-level position in this government. But to me, while I happen to be a Republican, I guarantee in this room, you don't get this many people in a room anywhere in Kentucky without having a good mix of Republicans and Democrats alike. And yet you're all here for the same issue. We want clean water. We want clean air. We want an environment that's not only good for ourselves, but also is sustainable for our children and grandchildren. We also want an environment that's conducive to doing business and creating opportunity and jobs for people so that people can stay here. And where do you balance that? And that really has been the purpose of the discussion over recent days, is where is that balance between what some might want and what others might want, and yet what is ultimately practical? And when I have been trying as best I can to shepherd this state forward, it's with that type of thinking in mind, that there is a balance to everything. And it's interesting, some of you are perhaps aware of this. This is the first political job I've ever had. This is not, I didn't groom myself for this. This isn't something I had aspired to. I didn't even study so much as a single political science course when I was in school. It just wasn't something I was going to do with my life. But like many of you, perhaps you groomed yourself for this. Interestingly, 30 years ago, 25 plus years ago, when I was a certified hazmat responder in the state of Louisiana, It would have been more likelihood that I'd have been in this room in one of these tables than here speaking to you on this front. So I have some appreciation from personal experience to some of the things that you all wrestle with and people who work with you and for you wrestle with. And this is part of what informs me. I was just saying to Charles a moment ago, I'm the least knowledgeable person in this room in some respects, I would guess, on almost anything you've been talking about. And yet I'm an intellectually curious person. I do find this to be an area where there's tremendous opportunity and possibility. And we in Kentucky are blessed by a whole lot of resources that other states don't have. How do we marshal those resources? How are we going to be good stewards of those resources? In light of a changing energy landscape, the fact that we have these two distinct seams, that we have the Central App region and we have the Illinois basin, we have these two coal basins, different types of coal, different abilities to get them out, different costs associated with it. We see a decline in the use of coal, and yet we still see more coal being consumed in the history of any time in the history of the world. More coal being consumed now than ever in the history of the world. And that's not changing any time in the immediately foreseeable future. Its percentage as a contribution to the electricity in this country is going down. Do we know that? You know that. It's going down even in this state. You know that. It's still a full third of the electricity produced in America. And while the energy landscape is in fact changing, and while there are any number of reasons that are contributing to that, not the least of which is an abundance of gas, we have renewables. I'll save some of my thoughts unless you really want me to go in there as to, I'll give you my highlight of thoughts. I'm a big fan of alternative, all the above. You hear people say it, I believe in it. But if we have to subsidize something in order to justify its existence to the degree that it can't even begin to cash flow or justify itself without other people's money, I'm less impressed with it. I really am. And so to that end, I think we need to balance all these things. Isn't to say we don't develop technology, but for all those that will tell you this particular source is dead, or that particular source is dead, or the future is going to be comprised of this, that, or the other thing, I would caution all of you to truly just be objective and observant. What is the reality? Again, the world is demanding more electricity than ever. Simultaneous with that, we're becoming more efficient than ever. It's interesting, somebody was telling me recently that if you took every single home in Kentucky, replaced a standard light bulb with an LED equivalent, just a single one in every home in Kentucky, that would be the equivalent of about 21,000 homes at a normal load, less in terms of demand on electricity. Think about that. Think about if we got to the point that every home started to replace within the home, and every business, and it's coming, of necessity, from a cost standpoint, from an availability standpoint, it's coming. So how in the energy industry, how in the utility industry do you balance the fact that there is decreasing load? Luckily in the world there's also increasing demand. So all these things come into play. They're building new coal-fired power plants in Europe right now, including in Germany, in places that are conceived of as being these forward green, futuristic, renewable types of places from the energy front. Why are they doing that? Because they want the lights to come on when they flip the switch. And a couple winters ago, when they had a brutally cold winter, and they had rolling brownouts, people were not too happy with that. They're also nervous about the fact that they're 30% dependent for all energy on the European continent on Gazprom. This is why Russia took Crimea. There's other extenuating reasons, but that was the real reason, so that they could have uninterrupted flow from Russia into Europe for energy, almost a third. And that makes people in Europe nervous. So all these things are moving parts, and they affect your world, and yours is a very dynamic world. But I always say to people, and of course coal is important to people in this state and in this region, and some who would say, as we alluded to a moment ago, that coal is dead. I will say, as surely as we're sitting/standing in this room, that while the energy future landscape may be different than it is today, the bridge from where we are now to where we will be built largely out of coal. It just will, of necessity. It's not, you don't just flip one thing and turn another one on. So how do we manage all this? How do we be good stewards of what we have an abundance of? And how do we do it in a way that ensures the environment we live in is the best it could possibly be? I have 9 children. You can bet I care about what kind of a world they're coming into. It is very different. When we were young, I look around here, you all are probably on average, most of us are playing on the back nine at this point. Some of you are not, but some of us are. That's all right. But I mean, when some of us were younger, I mean, there were rivers catching on fire, the Cuyahoga River and other things. People remember that. It was in the 70s, these kind of things literally happened. Was there a need for reaction? Sure. The pendulum swings sometimes this way and sometimes that way. But if you look at what has happened in the last 20 years in this country, I mean, if you look at the emissions, CO2 emissions and others, in the remarkable decline, 65, 75, 85% declines in the various things that have been attended to, that's fantastic. In technologies that have been developed in this country and some literally in this region of the country, these are the kind of things that have ironically not been exported. What has been exported is the energy consumption using coal, but not necessarily the technology. I'm grateful that we have an administration and an EPA that is mindful of the fact that there is this balance and that we can be good stewards while not being onerous to the degree that we suffocate some of the very technologies and capabilities that would allow us to do things better, cleaner, more efficiently than anywhere else. So all this is good, and I'm excited for you in some respects, because to the extent you've been in an industry that for a time seemed like maybe it was sort of stayed, it sure isn't now. There are few landscapes changing as rapidly as that of the energy landscape. And so for those of you in the energy and environmental worlds, you have a lot on your plate. And again, when you have a product, then you have byproducts, and how do you handle that? All the things that are in the wind right now, we have suits and we have lawsuits and we have things that are pending as it relates to any number of things. How you handle byproducts of certain processes and things of this sort. So there's a lot going on. But we have in Charles Snavely a secretary who gets it. He's a guy who comes from the industry. He doesn't have a knee-jerk response to things. He comes with quality. He comes with not only the character, but the competence, decades of understanding. And I hope you find in him somebody who's responsive. You see, many of us, myself included, wear these little pins, these little buttons. It's a little red button with a pair of scissors, cutting red tape. That's what it signifies. I was, depending on who you talk to, there's other people that see the scissors, and some people ask me if I give haircuts. I don't. Would you want this guy giving you a haircut? Come on. I mean, I don't even have a good haircut. But here's what's funny. This is something that is embraced by everybody. Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, people all over the spectrum. Nobody likes red tape. And interestingly, if you look at all of the regulations in the executive cabinet, and there's more than 4,500 of them that govern, with more than 130,000 rules associated with them, that govern what you can or can't do in Kentucky. About 19% of those regulations reside in this cabinet, in the Energy and Environment Cabinet. And interestingly, there were 850 or so, about 841, I think, when I was first elected. And we have taken it upon ourselves. I committed to cutting 30% of all the red tape in Kentucky over a 3-year period. And that was about a year and 3-4 months ago that we made that announcement. And in the process of the months that have ensued and those that are yet to come, we are going through and will continue to go through all of these regulations. Some of them are outdated and antiquated. They serve no purpose. Some are redundant and can be combined with others. Some need to just simply be modernized and brought in line with both federal and just common sense types of things that are being done. And so we've done that, and I applaud this cabinet. I mean, we've gone from, I think we've eliminated about 240-something of them already, which is a pretty healthy number. And guess what? For those that are concerned, and some are, people say, oh my goodness, our safety, our health, these things will be at risk if we start cutting regulation and red tape. I'm fairly confident that with 130,000 rules telling you what you can and can't do, that if we cut 30%, we can still pretty much keep a lid on you with 95,000 rules. I'm pretty sure that we can probably keep the people of Kentucky safe and secure by making sure they're the right ones. Sometimes we have all these extraneous things that just build on each other and become redundant and don't serve any real constructive purpose. And our job is those in government is to make sure that government doesn't become an entity unto itself. It's interesting, years ago, I was an active duty military officer, and when I was taking some graduate courses at the same time in the evenings and on the weekends. And I took I was taking a course in regulatory law as part of this curriculum that I was studying. And it's obviously, among others, we talked about those regulatory laws that affect the industry you're all a part of. And I wrote a paper, and I remember distinctly the title of it. And it's kind of ironic because it was written 25 years ago, at least, maybe a little more, somewhere a quarter of a century ago. The title of which was The Environmental Protection Agency, a Regulatory Frankenstein. And the argument was not that, if you go back and you read Shelley's book, I mean, the intent of Frankenstein was not to create a monster, quite the opposite. But what happened is something that began with good intent and for good reasons ended up becoming such that it turned on its very creator. And that's in essence what has happened and what runs the risk of happening with government. If we're not careful, things that we intend to do and do for good reason and with good intent do in fact turn on us. It's ironic that I wrote that a quarter of a century ago and how much more so that has become since then. And this is, I guess, what I would challenge each of you, and then I'll be happy to take any questions on anything. I challenge you in your jobs to be on guard against that, to stand firm against silliness and redundancy and bureaucracy and red tape that serves no constructive purpose. Some of it does. We need it for good reason. We need to have rules as to how we deal with the processes for producing energy, the byproducts of what comes from that, how we can be good stewards of all that we have. But the temptation is to err on the side of just a little more bureaucracy, a little more red tape, until suddenly you find yourselves inundated with things that don't even make sense and that sometimes conflict with one another, having almost, again, the exact opposite effect of what we would hope for. So I would encourage you in each of your jobs, take it seriously. Be proud of it. My vision for this state, and I will close with this and then take questions. My vision for Kentucky is a simple one. Some of you have perhaps heard me ask this question. This comes back to energy and why it's going to be important that we get this balance right in the energy production. We're blessed to have the cheapest electricity rates east of the Mississippi. We're fortunate for that. There's a number of folks from some of our utilities here, and I applaud you for that. I appreciate that, and I encourage you to maintain that. It's a competitive edge. But how many of you, if you had to engineer and manufacture something and you wanted it done to the absolute highest degree of excellence, you had to do it in continental Europe. So you want something engineered and manufactured to the highest degree of excellence, you have to do it in a single country in Europe. Where would you likely start? Germany. I mean, 100% of the time, that's the first answer that people have. Is it the only right answer? Of course not. You could do it in Switzerland, you could do it in Italy, you could do it in France, Belgium, any number of places, the Netherlands. There's a lot of places where things are engineered and manufactured well. But instinctively, Germany is the first thing that comes to people's minds. Why is that? Because there is a pattern and a methodology that has resulted in them having this sort of preeminent space in people's minds for the engineering and manufacturing of things of excellence. If I were to ask you the same question, if you wanted to engineer and manufacture something to the highest degree of excellence, you had to do it in a single state in the United States of America, where would you start? Some of you would say Kentucky, perhaps. Some would say Indiana, some would say Texas, some would say Georgia, some would say North Carolina, some would say South Carolina, some would say Tennessee, some would say fill in the blank. And guess what? Each would be as defensible and correct as the others. There really is not as distinctively and automatically a right answer. So what does that tell us? It tells us that nobody owns it. Like Germany owns it in Europe, the perception, and in some measure the reality, there is no equivalent in the United States of America. Nobody owns instinctively that moniker. So guess what? If nobody owns it, it's available for ownership. And Kentucky's going to own it. That's it. That's my vision. It's not complicated. It's simple. We're already well on our way. We are going to be the engineering and manufacturing center of excellence in the United States of America, bar none. Bar none. You think about it, we're on our way already. We're the per capita largest producer of automobiles and the third largest producer of automobiles absolutely of any state in America. Pretty amazing for this state of our size. Our largest product that we export is a very sophisticated and engineered and manufactured product in its own right, and a multitude of products in this industry. How many of you know what that industry is? I'm sure some of you do. What's our largest producer? Aerospace. Aerospace, engineered parts for the aviation industry. Here's what's interesting. People know about our cars. We make all the Super Duty trucks. We make all the Corvettes. We have the largest Toyota plant in the world just up the road a bit. You think about that. I mean, we are a huge producer, and yet automobiles are number 2. And numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 combined don't come close to number 1. Aerospace and aviation absolutely dwarfs the next 4 combined. Many people aren't even aware of that fact. Hundreds of thousands of people producing billions and billions of dollars worth of product that we export out of here. We're the second largest exporter of such products of any state in America, after only Washington, where Boeing manufactures their planes, the bulk of them. And so given that reality, we're already engineering and manufacturing things incredibly well. So how do we leverage that? How do we scale that? How do we solidify that to truly become this center of excellence in America? Part of it is we cut red tape. Part of it is we do the things that you do day in and day out. We make it easier for people to do business here. And for those of you in the energy industry, I would encourage you with the fact that if in fact we become, and we will become, the center of excellence for engineering and manufacturing, people who engineer and manufacture products use a lot of electricity. They need a lot of electricity. So it's imperative that we come up with clean, efficient, effective solutions for how we're going to deliver that and how we're going to continue to keep it as a competitive advantage while also delivering the demand that people will have. And when we put in an aluminum rolling mill, first greenfield aluminum rolling mill in North America in 40 years into eastern Kentucky, you can bet that it's just a matter of time before some of the peripheral players, the people who use 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 series aluminum, will say to themselves, why am I transporting that across the country? I'll just go build a facility right next door and we'll just literally move it in kind of just in time. We'll produce our products there. We're right on a river. We're right on a major highway. We're on a CSX rail yard head. I mean, the bottom line is in Northeast Kentucky, you can take product to anywhere in the world on any number of different modalities. This is coming. This isn't, again, I'm not painting a vision of something that we don't have the absolute ability to do, and frankly, better opportunity than almost anybody else. We're blessed with a geography that you could not recreate for any price. You could not buy our central location in the riverways, roadways, and railways that transect through our state. You couldn't. And so how then do we take advantage of it? What can we do? What can each of you every single day do to make it easier for employers to employ people? That's what it's about. Without compromising what is in our best interest and that of the employees that will work for those employers, how do we make it easier to get to yes or no? When I meet with companies, this is what I tell them. I say, listen, we may not be the best place for you to be. We may surprise you to the fact that we are. You may not have come in here under the assumption that we are. These are the kind of conversations I've had with the Brady Industries and the Amazons who built their world shipping hub or are in the process of building that, and people like that. They may not have instinctively thought, hey, we'll go to Kentucky first. And we sit down with these people, and as a business person, I tell them, listen, not all business is good business. I understand that. But we will help you get to yes or no faster than anyone else. And that's where some of you come very much into play. Because sometimes the answer is no. There are things that people would want to do, would need to do, that Kentucky is not the best place for them to do it. And there's no problem with that. We should get to know quickly so that they can move on and find wherever it is they're supposed to go. When that reputation gets out, and it's already starting to get out, people come here first. And guess what? If we get the first swing at everything, we're going to hit more than our fair share. We just are. Because the reality is some of those people don't even realize they're going to end up here. But they come here because they've gotten the word and the reputation that this is a cabinet, this is an industry, and we are a state that will help people move to yes or no quickly. And if in fact we deliver on that, if we are responsive, if we are attentive, if we are here to be allies to and not adversaries to those that would like to help us grow our economy, how fortunate we will be to live in this state. We already are. I mean, these days outside, I hope you've had a chance to get out from time to time the last couple of days. It's been stunning, beautiful. We are blessed with things in this state that others would dream of. And to that end, how do we harness it? So this is my vision. This is what I would hope to see come about, and this is what will come about. I truly believe it. It will take time. We're putting seeds in the ground. There's a germination process. It will take time for them to grow, but they will grow. And when they grow, they will flourish and blossom, and some of our children and grandchildren will eat of the fruit of the labors that we're doing right now. Some of us will as well. But a lot of these things are long-term solutions. So thank you for being a part of that. Thank you for being a part of this cabinet, those of you that work for the cabinet. Thank you for those of you that are in this room that don't. I understand there's probably a good third of you at least are not members of the state's administration of this area, but you're certainly interacting with it and affected by it. So thank you for being here. And thanks for what you do to make this such an extraordinary place. We are blessed to be Kentuckians. We truly are. What questions can I answer for you about anything? Anything at all? If you raise your hand, I'll see you, and then in the back. Yes, sir. And then I'll repeat your question. I think you probably could hear the question, but I'll repeat it, highlight. How do we generate in young people an interest in skilled trades, in physical labor that is sophisticated and technical by nature? Plumbers, carpenters, electricians. I was struck by a friend of mine recently who's a doctor actually had to call a master plumber over to take care of a problem in his house, and the guy was there for about 45 minutes, gave him the bill, and this doctor looked at it and said, "What? Whoa, seriously? Wow. You fixed the problem, and I appreciate it. I did call you, and you came, and you fixed it, but my goodness, you weren't even here an hour." And the guy said, "Listen, I'm sorry, that's it. And the doctor said, "Well, don't get me wrong. I'm a doctor. I'm going to pay you and all, but my goodness, seriously? Is this you sure?" And he was going on and on and on. Finally, the plumber put his hand around the doctor's shoulder, and he said, "Listen, I understand exactly how you feel." He said, "I felt the exact same way when I was a doctor." And so there is a need increasingly for some of the skills that you have, sir, and that's not lost on us. So at a high level, let me just touch on several things that we're doing. This is something that I have a real passion for. As somebody who, I have employed a lot of people with various skills in some of my previous lives. I've owned all or part of 10 different companies, including a lot that are in the metal stamping and trying to get tool and die guys, for example. I have a little company that I still own, has 2 tool and die guys. They're both in their 70s. I can't find a young guy that I can afford. The very best of the young guys get snapped up by bigger companies who can pay them a lot more. So how do you find that next generation? There are any number of young people in Kentucky who, frankly, don't want to go get a 4-year degree in interdisciplinary studies while they accrue debt. That isn't what they aspire to do. And yet we are increasingly pushing young people down this path that if you don't go to college, that somehow you're failing. Interestingly, just a little bit west of here in Shelbyville, Boeing, which makes the Dreamliner, one of the most, probably arguably the most sophisticated commercial aircraft in the world. The ribs of that Boeing Dreamliner, they're massive. Every one of these ribs, a single rib, costs more than $10,000. They're this huge, they're shaped like this. They're as big as this stage and then some. And these things are made using a very technological process. They're made of titanium. The fellow who oversees that entire process, the engineer who is the head of that entire process for the making of those ribs, using this proprietary technology, came out of school here in Kentucky and didn't go to college. He did eventually, 10 years later, because there were certain things he needed and wanted to do. He certainly had the capacity. But had he been a bit younger, we would have probably steered him, we collectively, as a society, would have steered him towards something that may or may not have been what his real passion was, which was to be a skilled tradesman, to use his instinctive and technological gifts for something of a higher purpose than just simply sitting and wearing a tie and nothing on it. I mean, I happen to be wearing a tie and I'm talking. I'm not making something. But everybody needs to use what their gifts are. And we in Kentucky, if we're going to be the engineering and manufacturing hub of America, have got to be able to bring those kind of skills you asked about to the forefront. I met with a company recently. It's not a North American company, but looking to potentially put their first North American footprint down. Their question was this, and this is what they're asking other states. They said, if we were convinced that we could hire 700 qualified welders in your state, we'd come there in a heartbeat. Could you imagine the kind of company? You can imagine the amount of electricity they use? Anybody who's going to employ 700 welders, they would be using a fair amount of electricity, I'm saying, just saying. But these are people these jobs are necessary. So we put together a $100 million workforce development initiative. And that was something where we've already disseminated that money. We said, number one, the state's not going to fund any project, no matter how good the project is. We'll come alongside. But we want the local business community, the local high school, and the local post-secondary school to work together jointly, the three of them, talk to one another, decide what they need, and submit a joint proposal about how they would use the state's money if the state came alongside them. The net result of this is we had $540 million worth of applications for $100 million. We were able to choose the top 17, 18% of those. And then because we said we're not going to fund 100% of them, the private communities themselves and the private sector ponied up more than $150 additional dollars. So in less than 2 years, we're putting $250 million into workforce development, into developing literally the very skills, and this is for training purposes. And guess what? Many of the several $100 million worth of applications that we were not able to fund at all, because the community was talking with itself, the business and the local schools, they loved their idea so much they decided to do it anyway. So there are things that I'm not even aware of that are being done at no cost to the taxpayers that are being done locally, all of these to help develop these kind of skills. We also looked around and said even beyond that, there's things that we need to do. And so, for example, right now we have an initiative. There are 5 areas where there are shortages. Construction trades is one. Logistics and advanced manufacturing, healthcare, IT. These are areas where there are tens and tens of thousands of unfilled jobs right now in Kentucky that need less than a 4-year degree, that need either a 2-year degree or some degree of certification or certifications. And so we said, listen, what we'll do as a state is we'll pay final dollar, we'll pay last dollar if you pursue any one of these areas. And you can go to a website, and forgive me, I don't remember, I think it's KentuckyWorks.com. You can Google it up, but I think it's kyworks.com. But and hopefully somebody will correct me if I'm wrong before I'm done here. But bottom line is you can go and see what these jobs are. And if you're willing to pursue one of these paths, the state will say after you get whatever financial aid you're able to get from wherever you can get it, we'll come along and pay last dollar so that for those 2 years it will not cost you a penny and you will have a job at the other end of it. And we don't care how old you are, as long as you've never attained an associate's degree or higher at anything. You could be 40 years old, 50 years old. If you want to go back and you want to become an apprentice essentially to somebody in the plumbing trade or wherever the case, and you will follow this certification process, we will make you whole. This is how we're going to transform our state. This is how we will infuse. And we also need to stop saying that from time to time, okay, we'll send students on field trips. We need to actually send parents on field trips, and principals and guidance counselors and superintendents, because people need to understand that 21st century manufacturing is not this stereotypical perception that they have in their minds. So this will take time. But part of it comes by beating this drum. And I have, if you've listened to me speak, I've always, from the time I've spoken, every one of my Commonwealth addresses, etc., I speak about the need to have skilled trades, to celebrate these, respect these, because it is essential. And there are not enough master electricians and master plumbers and skilled carpenters. There just aren't. We need more of them, and pilots and any number of other things. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Let me, sure. Is it directly related to that? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. And for those of you, if you didn't hear it, in essence, it's how can we be the best stewards of a resource we're blessed with an abundance of, which is our woodlands and trees specifically. Here's what I'll say, and I agree with you completely. Trees are a cash crop. That may seem crass to some or harsh to some, but they are. They're a cash crop, and any cash crop, if managed appropriately, can be a tremendous asset. We've learned a lot through the years. I mean, it's interesting. Significant. America is far more wooded now than it was 200 years ago. It's hard for people to imagine or believe. We have far more of our continent that is wooded than was the case a couple hundred years ago, because we used to clear cut things and burn things intentionally to open things up. The reality is trees can be a great resource. I happen to know a little bit about this. I own a fair amount of timberland. I have a brother who's a forester. My father worked in the wood industry most of my life when I was a kid growing up. This is something I know a little bit about, and I appreciate it, and I share with you the thought that I don't think we've taken good advantage of it. It breaks my heart when I look at a McCreary County in this state. 75% of that county is owned by the federal government with 1,000 different rules about what people can't do, and it's one of the poorest counties in America, and they are rich with a resource that just a couple of generations ago people were able to harvest and use thoughtfully, and we should. And this is a passion of mine, and it's something I've been working on. I was in France last year, and I met a company, and long story short, this is a company that is in the wood industry, and they happen to produce 15 billion of a certain thing every year, and people throw it away. That's just for the record, that's a good business. If you can get in a business where you make 15 billion of something and people keep wanting more of it, that's a good business. They happen to make it out of wood. They make coffee stirrers and popsicle sticks. The largest producer of such things in the world. And yet they only have 10% of the U.S. market, but all of the product that they make for the U.S. market, there's 10 billion of those in America alone that we consume. And they make 1 billion of them, but they make them in other plants in like Romania and the Czech Republic and Germany and places like that. France, where I met them, where they're headquartered. So when I went to meet with this company, I said, we have an abundance of the very things you look for. They actually want to make them out of beech. We have an abundance of beech. We have one of the best beech reserves in the country, in North America, is right here in eastern Kentucky. And so to that end, I said, listen, what can we do to help bring that capability here, where you could produce the product? Again, if they even had 20% of the market, which they easily could have. So they decided they would come and build. And so 2 days ago, I cut the ribbon down there at this factory. It's in Corbin, where they're bringing 90 good jobs, good paying jobs with benefits, an opportunity to people in a region that's been a little bit depressed economically, but it's taking advantage of this resource that we have. They're going to be working initially 3 shifts, 6 days a week, 24 hours a day. There will be logs coming in there, and there will be sticks coming out. I was speaking to the man who is the CEO. He's a third-generation owner of this company. His son, who was born in France, married a girl who happens to have been born in Cincinnati, actually. They just had a little baby girl born in Corbin, Kentucky, and they're going to be there managing this facility. They're committed. They're truly hands-on. They're not just some outside peripheral entity coming in and owning a company here. They're engaged in this community. And so the man who's the CEO, whose son is going to be running this facility, has already been thinking about what do you do with that excess product. I happen to own a company, among others, before I became governor, and now I have someone running this for me that I buy hundreds of tons of waste dust every year. I understand the incredible value of the byproducts of producing things. I buy dust that's ground and dried to very tight specifications, hardwood dusts. I use it in an extrusion process. I make millions of board feet of composite decking and railing systems that are 60% wood. It's made of dust that used to be landfilled and thrown away. Interestingly, now with biomass and things, we have plants going in eastern Kentucky, people making pellets. There's so many different ways we could take advantage of a resource that we have an abundance of. I think that's fantastic, and I think we'd be crazy not to. So do understand, starting in my role, and I'm encouraging people that I work with to think the same way, is how can we take advantage of this resource that we have so much of? Because again, if we're good stewards of it, and the original question that was asked, how do you manage a product when the product outlives us by a factor of whatever? And yet I will say this, while a tree in fact may grow to 250 years old, and you want to leave some there just for the stunning beauty of them, a 250-year-old tree is frankly not of much commercial value. It just isn't. That's the reality. There's a life cycle. And I own hundreds of acres of timberland in different places around the country, and there's a time and a place where you harvest certain things, and some of it's driven by demand. A few years ago, white oak, if you had an 18-inch to 24-inch stem, those things were just sailing out at high prices. Tremendous. So you open this up, and if you have a good management plan, that's everything. If you manage thoughtfully over a long time horizon, and you're not trying to be just expedient, but you have sort of a plan that will allow you to groom and crop whenever the time is right, then it can be a tremendously valuable resource. So this is something, again, I appreciate the question. It's something we have an abundance of, and yet the environmental impact of having a forested state as we do is also wonderful. It's why the air is so fresh. It's why it's so crisp and clean and awesome to live here. So all these things should not be lost on us. I think the key is we're comprised of many different parts here. We need to make sure they work with one another. I've probably kept you longer than how are we doing? Are we kind of at our time, I think? I don't want to... Time for one more question? Or no? What's that? I should make sure. I am supposed to be chairing a meeting in Frankfurt in a minute. Let me just make sure that it's not like now. I've still got a minute. So any other questions? Yes. Any other questions? Did you have a question? Anybody? Some of you are like, I have a question. Will you just stop so we could go eat? Somebody. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Here's what I'd say. Stay in touch with this cabinet. Some of you are part of the cabinet. Let us make Kentucky sparkle. Let's blow people away with respect to their interaction with us. When employers come, when people from the community come, when local government officials come to you and need things of you, be more responsive than you have ever been. Upside surprise them. Let's just blow people away. Let the word get out as it already is getting out that something's happening in Kentucky. because I tell you, we are just getting warmed up, and it's going to be fun a generation from now as we look back. I'll close with this. Somebody asked me shortly after I was elected what I would hope that when I was done being governor would be my legacy. What would I hope would be the case? And this is what I said to them with no facetiousness, and I'll say this to you. My hope is that when I'm done, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road from now, when people will say in other states, I want the governors of Florida, Texas, Indiana, Tennessee, Georgia, wherever. I want the governors of all those states to wonder why their kids all have to go to Kentucky to get a job. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Governor. Certainly, we really appreciate you being here. We do. And I appreciate all of you for coming. What we're going to do, we're finished now, so what we're going to do is we are going to transition over to the adjacent room for lunch. As you get in there, you feel free to go ahead and start eating, and when we're getting I'm afraid to say anything now. And when we get close to being finished, then we'll start giving out our awards. So feel free. Thank you.